Do you know this too? Your songwriting sucks hard and your mix sounds like absolute dog shit, but for whatever reason you were still narcissistic and illusionary enough to upload that unfinished garbage to SoundCloud or Bandcamp, where unsurprisingly nobody gives a fuck because it's still an insult to everyone's eardrums?
Hi, I'm Bosmic and I'm making music for a while now, and other than that I don't really have any authority to speak about this topic, but I will anyways. So make yourself comfortable and get ready for some life-changing advice, for I will now explain to you why your music still sounds like shit.
Advice number 1, follow the goddamn rules. Look, rules of thumb are there for a reason, whether it is don't fix it in post, don't cup the mic, don't use smiley face EQs, repetition legitimizes, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, don't write riff salad, don't add it to the crit, or whatever else you heard. These rules are legit and they are there for a reason, and you should definitely listen to them and follow them. If you don't know what rules apply to your certain situation, no problem, there's the thing called the eternal wisdom and power of YouTube tutorials. So just go on YouTube, type in whatever the fuck you're about to do, followed by the word tutorial, and bam! All the knowledge of mankind is on your hands. Free and understandable and explained by people that are a million times smarter than you, more experienced and more successful. Just like me. Take them seriously because they know what they're talking about and you should apply their knowledge to your work. Making music is neither magic nor rocket science. It's actually pretty easy if you know what you're doing, and all the knowledge you need is out there for free, so there's no excuse. Advice number 2, don't follow the goddamn rules. What are you, sheep? Rules are there to be broken, and whoever tells you to follow the rules without thinking for yourself is obviously full of shit. Cause there are no rules that apply to everything. It always depends on context and on your taste and on your subjective preference. Let me give you an example. Let's take the rule you don't touch mastering until you're done mixing. I heard that rule years ago in a tutorial and I lived by that rule because it kinda made sense, you know, you finish one process and then you start the other. Problem was, after mastering, my mixes sounded quite different than before and I had to often go back into the mix and rework things afterwards. And it wasn't until years later that I saw another tutorial by none less than fucking Adam Nolly Getgood, who was like, oh yeah, I like to start off with just adding some basic EQ and loudness maximizer on my mastering channel first so I get an idea how it sounds like in the end. And I was like, wait, that's allowed? You can do that? I mean, if fucking Nolly does it, it's probably legit. He even had a cool term for it. Apparently it's called top-down mixing and shit has been around for ages. And there have been a lot of examples like this for me personally, where I thought you have to do it like this, and then it took ages to get it out of my system, and mostly other tutorials or authorities that were allowing me to do it differently than I used to. So my point is, there are no rules. Music is an art form and therefore completely free. You don't have to stick to anything. You can and you should do whatever the hell you want and whatever feels right to you. I mean, it's your music after all. So why does your music still suck then? Maybe it is because of advice number 3. You didn't follow the goddamn rules. You thought my first point wasn't valid because the second one was the opposite? Not how it works, kiddo. I mean, if you wanna be a fucking smart-ass hipster who's just like, oh yeah, I'm just making music for myself and I don't care what anyone else thinks about it, just go for it, nobody's holding you back. But don't expect anyone to like it or, dare I say it, pay for it. I mean, it's not forbidden, it just sucks. Alright, see, making music is an ambivalent thing and it's all about making compromises, so both of these advices are true. Let me put it like this: treating music as an art form, which is therefore completely free and nothing is forbidden, is one extreme of the spectrum. On the other hand, you're probably not making music for yourself because usually you want to express something with your music and say something with it, so you need someone to say it to. That's your audience, and since your audience doesn't exist in a vacuum, which means that they probably listen to other music too, they have certain expectations on what makes good music for them. And even though they can't tell you in technical detail why they like what they like, they probably have some kind of intuitive taste. So it's also your job as a musician or as a producer or as a musical creator to satisfy these expectations and reach certain standards. That's the other side of the spectrum. So this is you, this is the audience. This is complete freedom, this is complete conformity. You can't do just this because nobody will listen to it, and you can't also just do this because without having anything of yourself in your music, you're just gonna end up being a copy of someone else. And the thing with copies is that the copy is never as good as the original. So this doesn't work either. So you have to stick to this middle area here, hence the word compromise. So look up tutorials and get your basic knowledge down, but don't take any of the rules as a given. Stick to certain standards and conventions, but also think outside the box just enough to get something new to the table. Orient yourself on the idols and artists you like, but also try to find your own unique style. Alright, so let's get a bit deeper into making music, and I don't want to get all technical here because I still want that everything I say applies to all genres and styles. So I would argue there are three main columns of making music. At first you have your technical skills. That's the instrument you play or your vocals or whatever workflow you have in creating artificial sounds or sampling or whatever. That's probably in the most cases where your initial inspiration comes from and where you come up with general ideas as a starting point. That's what a musician does. Then you have composition. That's all about adding different inputs together in a pleasing way. So that's all about arrangement and structure and really bringing your initial idea to life by telling a story around it. It's about movement, it's about tension and release, and it's all about intentions. So this is what a composer does. So the third column is production, and here it gets really technical and it's all about how to present your composition to your audience. Production is all about sound and all about balance between your different elements and a lot about space management. I'll get to that later. And also it's in the production where a lot of the energy comes from and where you set a lot of the mood for a piece together with the composition, of course. So that is what a producer does. And I, and probably you as well, do all three of these things. So that's why I use this weird term of musical creator before, just to differentiate between all of these work steps. So all of these steps aren't completely separated and they merge into one another all the time, even the first and the last one, so you have always a back and forth in between here. It's not like you're done with one thing and then you go to the other and never touch it again. Alright, so let's give you some advice for every one of these steps, and again I want to keep it vague enough so it works for every genre and style. So for the musician side of things, it's relatively straightforward and it's mostly know your shit, know your place. See, a good musician is not someone who can play fast or can play fancy technical stuff or can play all the different styles. A good musician is someone who can play clean and effortless and knows what he's doing at all times. And that also merges into the other column, because a good musician knows his place and especially knows when to shut the fuck up and let someone else or some other musical element step into the foreground. Because music as a whole is not about the one instrument you happen to be playing, it's about bringing different elements together. Even if it's all just you doing the playing, you should still consider every instrument to be providing its very own function to your music. So the instruments should always serve your music as a whole and not the other way around, that the music serves you flexing with your instrumental skills. So this goes out to my fellow guitarists when I say, don't write riff salad. See, if you have a good riff, good for you, doesn't make a good song. And of course I did that. I wrote a whole EP just riff salad, and then I was so satisfied with it that I followed it up with a whole album just riff salad, and I uploaded it, and guess what? Nobody gave a shit. Because it weren't good songs. The songs had great riffs and good melodies, but the songs itself were kind of boring and going nowhere. So as a musician you can come a long way even without being all fancy, just by being aware of what role you play within a musical context. Alright, let's talk about composition, and the most important advice I would give you here is don't overdo it. So when I started composing, I just wanted it all, and I wanted to show off and include everything I was technically able to do in literally every song. I didn't even want to write songs, I just wanted to write like perfect masterpieces all the time. See, and that's a problem, because music isn't usually about showing off your skills. Music is usually about telling a story and presenting some kind of idea. And another beginner's mistake I made was that my songs were just too long, because I wanted to include so much in there, but to present something specific with intention, you don't necessarily need that much time. So always ask yourself, what is it what I want to say with my song and what is my song about? And then you stick to that intention. So this merges back into the first column when I say don't write stuff you can't play or struggle to play or someone else can't play, like when you compose for your band, for example. At least when you want to play live, cause shit can backfire badly when you're standing on a stage and you have stage fright and are all nervous, and then you have to play something that you can barely play in a controlled environment home alone. Shit's gonna suck and you're not doing yourself a favor. And if you know that you won't ever play live, then it kinda doesn't matter. Then just go nuts, let the computer handle the hard parts, or record it slow and then speed it up. Like, that's not forbidden. But especially in a band context, it's super important to know your own limits and also the limits of your fellow musicians that you're writing for. So yeah, don't overdo it, like literally calm down right now. I know if you're just starting out with composing, you want to reach for the sky and you want to touch people with your music and everything has to be perfect, but it won't, and it doesn't have to be. Your first attempts are gonna suck anyway, so just get them over with and don't put yourself under too much pressure of being perfect from the start. You won't be, nobody ever was, and that's fine, that's the point. Just start small, keep going, keep improving, don't pressure yourself too much and don't overdo it. Alright, let's get into the third column here, which is production, as in recording, mixing and mastering. And to explain that better, let's get a bit poetical. So imagine it like that. Silence is your empty canvas, and left and right is your panorama, and up and down is your frequency spectrum. Needless to say that this is oversimplified, and as a producer your job is to fill that canvas as evenly as possible and keep it filled all the time. And I'm not talking intros and outros here, they can fade out and fade in on the canvas however they want, but when the song is going, the whole canvas should be full. And it doesn't matter what you have in your composition. If you just have very few inputs in your composition, you can and should make them bigger and more interesting. And if you have a lot of inputs in your composition, you should make them smaller and contain them to the very precise spot on the canvas they are supposed to be. Because when you have too much going on and you can't get control of it, you will just end up with an undistinguishable clusterfuck of noise, and nobody wants that. Let me give you an example from me. So when I mix for my symphonic metal band, we have a lot of inputs. So the kick goes down in the middle, the snare goes above it in the middle, the bass is in the middle as well, right under the main vocals. The cymbals are on top of it all over the place, and the rhythm guitars are panned out hard left and right on the sides. So every additional lead guitar or lead instrument is either somewhere in between here or replaces the vocals. And the whole orchestra and synthesizers are basically all over the place, but they are more in the background, so they fill in the blanks. And voila, the whole thing is more or less filled. And when you have just too much and shit's starting to sound weird and you can't really tell things apart anymore, then you have to maybe go back into composition and ask yourself, do I really need this 7th layer of guitars in here? Do they really express my original intention, and are they really necessary to tell my story? And since you're already asking, you probably already know the answer, which is no. Ditch that shit, it's just too much. And that brings us to another important thing, which in music is called the killing your babies mentality, which also works here. That's when you painfully realize that something you already put a lot of effort in is in the end just not working out, and you have to, bite the bullet and ditch it. And that's something you have to learn, because it's hard and it's counterintuitive, because usually you like the stuff you already made and it's hard to let it go, but sometimes it's just necessary, especially when working together with other people. Also, you have to be clear that everything you do in composition also has to be accounted for in production. So for a long time I had absolute fear of using temporal lead guitars, because I mixed my rhythm guitars hard left, hard right, and it sounded good. And then I added another lead guitar in the middle on top of that, and it sounded even better. But then the lead guitar was over with its part and it just vanished, and it left that giant hole in the middle of my mix. And that lead guitar is a decision you made in the composition process, but that has to be accounted for in the production. So to avoid that the vanishing lead guitar sounds like it left a hole in the mix, you have to compensate in production for that hole. So you have to fill that hole up with something else, even if it just means making the rhythm guitars louder at that point. Alright, so let's get back to the canvas analogy for a second and talk about how you do it.
You basically have three main tools in mixing. First is just simply your pan slider that makes things go left and right. And then you got your EQ that makes things go up and down. And the third tool you have is your compressor, and to explain what that does, the canvas analogy kinda comes to its limits here because it completely ignores the third dimension, which is time. So to make sense out of this, you could imagine the canvas as kind of a screenshot of a CT scan maybe, and every shift on the canvas is something that happens as your music goes by, and to get control over that third dimension, which is everything that has to do with dynamics as in volume in time, you got your compressor for that. And I'm not going into technical detail about compressors right now, but if you're new into mixing, I would strongly recommend you check out some tutorials on that matter. Because panning and EQ and most of the other effects are pretty much self-explanatory, and you can find out how they work by trial and error and just messing around. But that doesn't count for the compressor. Here you have to intellectually understand how it works, because you're not going to figure out what all these different parameters do just by listening. And I also had to learn that the hard way, and it took me some time, so do yourself a favor and check out how a compressor works before you use it. Alright, so let's wrap it up here with some general mindset rules. Expect your first attempts to suck, so maybe don't upload them to the public right away, because that can backfire, and it's super frustrating when people tell you that your stuff sucks. That's why I'm doing it right now, so your friends don't have to later. Embrace failure, keep going, keep improving, you will get there eventually. I mean, it took me years as well. I'm playing guitars for over 17 years now, writing my own songs maybe for 14 years now, and started producing 8 years ago. So it clearly didn't come overnight for me as well. Always aim for the middle. Music is an ambivalent thing, and it's all about balance and compromises, so don't go all out on one thing and forget about the others. Try to bring in your own unique style, but stick to the standards if you want to be heard. And if you apply what I just said, then maybe your music stops sucking so hard, because now you know better.